So it's very important to make sure that you know how to add or subtract fractions and mixed numbers. I know that you've learned this in the past, but it's important to go through it again and get it into your notebooks to make sure you can reference it if it's something that you feel like you need more practice in or need some reminders. So the first thing, I'm sure you haven't seen this quite like this before, but this is what I always use to remember when adding or subtracting fractions, and of course that includes our mixed numbers. I love eating apples and avocados. So these are the things that our acronym stands for. I is for improper fractions, L is for the least common multiple, E is for equivalent fractions. Next we have to add or subtract those numerators, and then finally we have our answer and we need to reduce it. So pause this here and get this into your notebook if you haven't already. Okay, so we're going to do a few examples here. Make sure you get all the examples into your notebooks because each one is slightly different from the last. First one that we have here is 1/2 plus 5/6. So we use the acronym that I taught you by setting up a nice little chart here. It starts out with the I over here for improper fractions. I love eating apples and avocados. Now, I personally love apples and avocados. If you don't, well, you can pretend you do, or you can make those A's stand for something else that you do like, but either way, it's a fun acronym, I think, and it certainly does help us keep things in line. So, the first thing that we need to do is to change these fractions to improper fractions if necessary. Well, really, we only need to do that when they're mixed numbers. Neither of these is a mixed number, so I'm just going to bring them right down as is. So I've got 1/2 plus 5/6. The next step is to find the least common multiple. So I'm heading up here to my least common multiple. L is for least common multiple. And the numbers that I need to find the least common multiple for, of course, are the denominators, 2 and 6. So I know I'm finding the least common multiple of 2 and 6. So in other words, if you get confused about GCF and LCM, the least common multiple is the smallest or least thing that these two numbers, 2 and 6, can go into, or that 2 and 6 are both gazintas of. So if I look at 2 and 6, I know they're both even, and since they're both even, I know that 2 goes into both of them. So that does help me know that their least common multiple would be this 6 right here, because 2 certainly goes into the 6. So I know that the least common multiple is 6. And now I need to make both of these original fractions into my new equivalent fractions. My equivalent fractions are going to use 6 as their denominator. So I know that both of my new fractions have to have a denominator of 6 and that they are being added. So how do I get from 2 to 6? Well, I know I multiply times 3. Therefore, I take my numerator, which gets multiplied by 3. 1 times 3 is 3. Now, more than likely you could have done that in your head, but we want to make sure that we see each and every one of these steps to make it very, very clear. This one, to get from 6 to 6, it's times 1, or we know that it's already 6. So I'm just going to simply leave that numerator the same and bring over the 5. My next step is to add. I'm only adding the numerators. So for now, I'm going to ignore both of the denominators when I bring them up here, and I'm going to be adding 3 plus 5. Whoops, sorry about that. It's 3 plus 5. 3 plus 5 I know is 8. I bring my 8 down here for my final answer, and the denominator stays exactly the same, so it's 8/6. And I do know that I need to reduce that. I find their largest gazinta. I know that again, they're both even, so 8 divided by 2 and 6 divided by 2, because 2 is their largest gazinta. 8 divided by 2 is 4. 6 divided by 2 is 3. 3 is too little to hold up that big giant 4, so my final answer here would be 1 and 1/3. Next, well, it's going to be the same process, but this time we're going to be subtracting. So I want to write out my acronym. I love eating apples and avocados. Again, they do not need to be changed into improper fractions, so I'm going to stay with 7/8 minus 1/6. My least common multiple is going to be of my two denominators, which in this case are 8 and 6. They are both even, but that doesn't help me in this case. So what is a number that both 8 and 6 are gazintas for? Well, hopefully you should be able to figure that out if you know your multiplication tables. If not, pull out that multiplication chart and use that. The answer here is 24, because that's the smallest number that both 8 and 6 goes into. So I know my new denominators for both of these are going to be 24. I'm subtracting. How do I get from 8 to 24? I know I multiply times 3. So therefore 8 times 3 is 24. Oh, sorry about that. I knew that 8 times 3 was 24. That's why I said to multiply times 3. So I'm actually multiplying is 7 times 3, which is going to give me 21. And then how do I get from 6 to 24? Well, I know that's times 4. So therefore I'm going to do 1 times 4, which is 4. My next step, I'm going to be adding or subtracting the numerators. In this case, they are being subtracted. 21 minus 4, you should know, is 17. I bring that 17 straight down. 17, folks, keep the new denominator that I made is 24, and then it needs to be reduced. In this case, they don't share a gazinta, so it is already reduced. So my answer here is 17/24. Sorry, right along. Our next problem. 1 3/4 plus 3/10. First thing I want is to set up my organizer and my acronym. Improper fractions. In this case, we are actually going to need to find the improper fraction for 1 3/4, because we can't add or subtract. Well, we can, but it makes our lives a whole lot easier if we change them to those mixed numbers to improper fractions. So to do that, I know I go right around. 4 times 1 is 4, plus 3 more gives me 7/4, and this is all set, so it's plus 3/10. My next step is to find the least common multiple of my denominators. In this case, my denominators are 4 and 10, so I'm finding the least common multiples of 4 and 10. So what is the smallest number that 4 and 10 are both gazintas of? Well, hopefully, again, you recognize that that number in this case is 20. If not, you've pulled out your multiplication chart and you've found that they share 20 as a multiple. Now I know that I need to transfer each of these fractions into a number that is a denominator of 20. I'm still adding them. How do I get from 4 to 20? I know that's times 5, so therefore 7 times 5 is 35. how do I get from 10 to 20? I know in this case that's times 2, so 3 times 2 is 6. I grab both the numerators, I bring them up here. 35 plus 6 is 41. I bring my 41 down here. Keep the denominator I had, which is 20, and now I need to reduce. 20 is far too small to be holding up that big giant 41. How many times does 20 go into 41? Well, I know that 20 times 2 is 40, and I've got 1 left over, keeping that the denominator. So my answer is 2 1/20. Got one more. Whoa, able to go. This time we're subtracting. Again, we have a mixed number that we're going to have to change into an improper fraction. So let me set up my organizer. I love eating apples and avocados. I'm going to bring this straight down. I know my mixed number is what I need to change into an improper fraction. 2 times 3 is 6, plus 1 more is 7. Denominator stays the same, so it's 7/3 minus 7/8. I'm going to look at those two denominators when I look for my least common multiple. So the least common multiple of 3 and 8. Well, this time one is odd and one is even, so I can't use that as my basis. So the lowest number that they actually share is going to be 3 times 8, which is 24. Be careful of falling into the trap, though, of thinking that it's always going to be those two numbers multiplied together, because sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's going to be a smaller number, which will make your life easier to deal with the smaller numbers. So both have to have a denominator of 24. We are still subtracting. I say to myself, how do I get from 3 to 24? I know that that's times 8. So I'm going to do 7 times 8. Well, let me fix that. That doesn't look quite like a 7. 7 times 8. I know that that's 56. And then I'm going to say to myself, how do I get from 8 to 24? I know that that's times 3. 7 times 3 is 21. I'm going to take both of those numerators, move them right up here. So I'm then going to have 56 minus 21. So I know some of you are inclined to pull out those calculators, and I'm not going to tell you you can't, but this really is a simple one. 56 minus 21. 56 take away 20. 50 minus 20, don't forget, would be 30. 6 minus 1 is 5, so 56 minus 21 is 35. I bring that right down. That's going to be my numerator. Denominator stays the same, so it's 35 over 24. That does need to be reduced because that little 24 is too small to hold up the big giant 35. How many times does 24 go into 35? It goes into it 1 time. 35 minus 24. Well, I know to get from 24 to 30, that's 6, plus 5 more is going to be 11. And I keep the denominator as 24. 1 11/24 is my final answer.